Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad, and a very warm welcome to Friday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. On today's show, we react to the Warner Brothers Discovery Investors Call and react to what David Zaslav had to say on that investors call, because I found it quite interesting and fascinating. And when you kind of think about what he had to say, the influence of former Warner Brothers CEO and Disney former CEO Alan Horn is pretty obvious here. So David Zaslav discussed being in on the early development stages of Superman Legacy, sitting in on James Gunn's process in the early development of Superman Legacy, before he decided to make him co-chair of DC Studios. It's within that early process of those development stages that David Zaslav decided to make James Gunn co-chair of DC Studios. So I think this sorts it all out, this kind of revelation that James has been working on Superman Legacy for over 6 months, that he was doing that, including, a couple of other projects that he's announced as part of the God and Monsters slate, prior to be made co-chair of DC Studios. So basically, it was David Zaslav's experience of watching what James Gunn was doing with Superman and being impressed with what James Gunn was doing with Superman, which led him to bin Man of Steel 2 and bin the idea of bringing Henry Cavill back, and pretty much doing with what James wanted to do and making him co-chair of DC Studios. So I think that's very, very interesting, because this makes sense of the whole situation and it makes it look a lot less toxic. Zaslav also discussed about Superman being this huge, important IP to Warner Brothers Discovery, and how they hope to do a lot more with the character in the future. This is music to the ears of this Superman fan, and there's no question about that. This, baby, is what I want to hear. He also discussed loving the Flash movie. He's sold on the Flash movie. It's pretty clear they think they have something special in the Flash movie. I've never heard public kind of positivity from a studio, this studio, about a DC movie. I just haven't heard it. And it's true. I haven't heard such positivity about a DC movie since The Dark Knight. They were also very excited about The Dark Knight. Of course, it was a different leadership back then, because there was this rumours that the Flash movie is the best DC film since The Dark Knight. But, claims like that, of course, are very, very dangerous. You don't really want to be making claims like that, because it could end up basically shitting on your face. But clearly, they're very comfortable and confident about this movie. There's definitely a discussion to be had about Walter Hamada, who put this film together, who appointed Andy Muschietti to make his movie. Now, it's good to be Andy Muschietti, because they're doing an It prequel series on HBO Max, and he will direct a couple of those episodes. Of course, he directed It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2 as well before he did the Flash movie. So it's pretty clear the Warner Brothers are very confident about this Flash movie. And if they're right about the finished film, when it's all polished and done, and when we get to see that finished article, wow. I mean, obviously, I can't wait to see this movie. But it is interesting when he talks about sitting in on James Gunn in the early development stages of this movie. And it just goes to show you that he's very confident in what James Gunn is doing. He's very confident about the Flash movie. And it's always good to hear this kind of confidence from a CEO, from a company, because now they're talking as one entity. There's not one saying that and one saying this. It's not like the old regime, which was splintered from AT&T to, Warner Media, then Warner Brothers Pictures. There was a multitude of civil wars going on. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. And I know that I've hinted that maybe there is an issue between, DeLuca and Adby. It's clear they were running DC before James Gunn came in, but they were never going to be the permanent fix. Or maybe they were. Maybe Mike DeLuca was running things. And then basically Zaslav started sitting in on James Gunn's early process of making Superman Legacy, and he thought, well, this guy knows what he's doing. Let's put him in charge of this new studio. This is a better idea, Zaslav is thinking. So that's what he's done there. So what was the original idea before Safran and Gunn were co-CEOs of DC Studios? Clearly, Adby and DeLuca were running DC, or DeLuca was certainly running DC. Maybe that was the final decision. But also clearly, James Gunn was making Creature Commandos, developing it, and developing Superman Legacy, which surely were going to be part of this new studio's vision. So clearly, James Gunn was going to be a head creative at DC Studios, but he wasn't going to be the one directing and dictating what happens with the slate and what they were going to do with the future. What was Superman Legacy going to be? Well, James Gunn said it was always a separate project from Man of Steel 2. Now, it's also interesting because why were they developing two Superman projects? It's clear to me, and because I know the workings of studios, they were never going to have two versions of Superman. Or were they? I guess we'll never know. But I don't think that they were. It was either going to be one or the other. I said this a couple of days ago, I think Zaslav had them both working up two different versions of Superman. Henry Cavill and James Gunn's Superman Legacy. And he went, go on boys, go for it, impress me. Best version wins. And it's clear that Zaslav felt that Superman Legacy, with a brand new actor playing Superman from James Gunn, was a better version. And I think this is an interesting way of doing things. Do I think this is toxic? The only toxic situation is that they told us that Henry Cavill was back as Superman. So either they were lying, or there could be a possibility, even though I just said there wasn't a possibility, that maybe Henry Cavill's Man of Steel 2 was as well as Superman Legacy. That could also be on the table as well. Maybe Henry Cavill's Man of Steel 2 was going to be part of DC Elseworlds. Maybe that's what they were going to do. One final movie for Henry Cavill. Or maybe they were actually thinking of doing this Black Adam versus Superman thing if Black Adam was successful, which it wasn't. I think once it wasn't successful, Henry Cavill was off the table anyway. So I do feel that yesterday's Warner Brothers Discovery investors call was a very positive thing. As you know, David Zaslav continues to say what he said from before he took over Warner Brothers, where Superman was going to be the most important thing on the table. James Gunn, several months ago, even before, announcing the slate and telling us the title of his Superman movie, saying that Superman is the most important thing in the universe. This comes from Zaslav. Zaslav believes that Superman is the most important character. Whether this is the right decision or a wrong decision remains to be seen. Don't forget, Man of Steel was also a Superman movie, and it was the first introduction to the DCEU. So we know how that ended up. But as a Superman fan, I agree. Superman should be the intro movie. He should be the most important character. But they're not just going to, just because Superman's really important, it doesn't mean they don't value other DC characters, like characters that we haven't seen in live action before. It's just they understand the importance of getting Superman right. Because in many people's opinions, Superman hasn't been gotten right for many, many, many years. So it'll be interesting to see James Gunn's take on Superman. Look, he's said a few things about who his Superman will be in Superman Legacy, so they're certainly going to give people the Superman they've been crying out for many, many years. Now, for the small minority of Snyder fans who believe Superman should kill and shouldn't just be this bright, inspirational figure, you had your Superman. You had 3 movies of your Superman. Now it's time to go back to the OG Superman. And that's also okay, because a spoilt child wants everything their own way all the time. And it's just not going to happen for you. You see, if movie Twitter and CBM Twitter, if those opinions were the opinions of genuine people who went to the movie theatres, the industry would be in bigger trouble than I already think that it's in. But thankfully, movie Twitter and CBM Twitter are not the genuine opinions of people who go and watch films and support films financially. That's the truth. I'd say a third of people talking about movies on social media, whether it's CBM movies or TV shows even, or movies in general, most of the time don't even go and support this shit in movie theatres. And ain't that the truth? It's just a bunch of people shooting their mouths off. And that's fair enough, because everyone's entitled to their opinions. But we're moving on from woke entertainment. We're moving on from, basically upsetting people. We're basically, especially at Warner Brothers Discovery, especially with the shelving of Batgirl, that tells you everything you want to know. Because if they were going down a woke direction, Batgirl would never have been shelved, would it? A Batgirl played by a woman of colour. A Batgirl whose best friend is actually, I think, a non-binary or transgender character. Things like that. Well, all that's been shelved. Been shelved for a reason. Make of that what you will. But clearly, we're going back to sanity at Warner Brothers Discovery. Now, away from DC, and I just want to touch on this quickly because it means a lot to me, is that they've also announced at this investors call that they are going to be developing more Lord of the Rings movies. That the company that owns these properties had done a deal with Warner Brothers for them to make many, many Lords of the Rings films. And basically Peter Jackson and his wife Philippa have been kept in the loop ever since these discussions started. Peter Jackson hasn't confirmed whether or not he'll be writing and directing these films, but it's looking very good. And also, just before I go back to DC, what does this mean for the Amazon Lord of the Rings show? It's very, very bad news, because who's going to give a shit about that series when we're getting the OG director back and they're talking about making Aragon movies and different characters that we saw in the original movies. So there's a lot of excitement there as well. So it's pretty clear that Warner Brothers is going places under David Zaslav. This guy is making ruthless, right decisions. He was making right noises from the beginning. Nobody can tell you that appointing, Gunn and Safran as the co-CEOs of DC Studios is either the right or wrong decision. It's about opinions. Ultimately, it's about the final product, which we haven't seen yet. So no one can make a final decision whether that's a good idea. But at this moment in time, despite the ridiculous situation of bringing Cavill back and not bringing Cavill back, that's ridiculous. I can't defend that. But one thing doesn't make the other thing bad. That's what we got to remember as well. The slate is good. The first chapter being called Gods and Monsters is good. As I say, what's in the slate so far is amazing. But the other thing is as well, it's also been confirmed that not only are they actually going to screen the entirety of the Flash movie at CinemaCon, they're actually going to announce maybe, and there's confirmations coming from different sources here, I haven't heard this from the studio, but apparently they're going to announce the the rest of the Gods and Monsters slate at CinemaCon. So it's pretty clear that Warner Brothers, David Zaslav, James Gunn and Peter Safran understand what geeks and nerds want. They want DC Studios and Warner Brothers Discovery to literally stamp their authority on CinemaCon at San Diego Comic-Con. I get it on here all the time. Oh, Mick, they're going to announce this and that at Comic-Con. That's what people want. That's what people are used to. Marvel used to do it all the time. Since the COVID pandemic, really, there hasn't been much hype coming from San Diego Comic-Con. But it seems to me that Gunn, Safran and everyone at WBD now understand that this is how you capture the audience. By making huge announcements, doing huge things at these big conventions like San Diego Comic-Con and CinemaCon, which is a pretty big deal as well. I think for the fans and the geeks and nerds, San Diego Comic-Con is bigger, but CinemaCon is a pretty fucking big event. And now that we're getting over COVID and where life is going back to normal now, these events can happen. So if they screen the Flash movie there, which they are, but if they actually announce the rest of Gods and Monsters at CinemaCon, Warner Brothers Discovery and DC Studios are going to own CinemaCon, a very important event. As Marvel Studios starts to lose the support it had, lose the trust it had with audiences, this new CEO, David Zaslav, is trying to rebuild something special. Not just with DC, but with the other IPs that they're gaining. As I say, they're bringing in really, really big directors now. I think like M. Night Shyamalan being given an exclusive contract, that's a Zaslav decision. That's a great decision. Lord of the Rings movies being in development, probably from Peter Jackson and his wife Philippa and their team. Very, very exciting. They're looking to develop the Harry Potter IP with Joe Rowling. David Zaslav is in conversations with her. So I'm a Warner Brothers fan in general. It was the logo that stuck in my mind as a kid. Why? Because they made Superman. They made one of my favourite shows of all time, Knight Rider, and different things like that. So, and they made Looney Tunes cartoons, which were my favourite cartoons as a kid. So Warner Brothers was always the company that were my company growing up. So I've always been a big fan and supporter of Warner Brothers, but it's died a slow and painful death under the leadership of Emmerich. And, even in the Time Warner era, and Time Warner owned Warner Brothers for a very long time. We're talking about decades before AT&T bought it out. AT&T, they did a worse job. They had no clue how to run an entertainment media company. But Zaslav literally built, Discovery Plus from the ground up. He's a really clever dude. And the best leaders are the ones that say, do you know what? I don't get this industry. I'm not experienced in scripted entertainment. So I've got to bring experience in to advise me. So he brings in Alan Horn, an iconic, legendary CEO of the past. It was Alan who was at Warner Brothers when Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy was green lit. It was Alan Horn who was there when Harry Potter was bought. The rights to the films were bought, right? And they worked alongside Joe Rowling. So Alan Horn, even though he's quite old now, has been advising Zaslav, and they're fucking killing it. These are ruthless. All these decisions that I'm talking about, these are amazing decisions. And this bodes well for DC. Make no mistake. Let's just take a look at what we've got to look forward to in the terms of DC going forward. We have a new DC universe being formed. A bold, exciting DC universe. Whatever's happened in the past, which is not great, right? But this future that they're plotting from the outside looking in, if you haven't got any bias, is actually very, very exciting. It is. So we've got a great slate. We've got a great first chapter. We've got a solid Shazam! Fury of the Gods movie. We've got, hopefully one of the best CBMs ever made, according to the studio and James Gunn. Now, let's not forget, when they talk about one of the best CBMs ever made in the Flash movie, they're not calling Shazam! Fury of the Gods that or the other DC movies coming this year that. So it's not like they're boldly saying all these movies are the best. Then you'd have to call them out as liars. When they talk about the best CBM and the CBM they're most excited about, they're talking about The Flash. Now, of course, it cost a lot of money. They're in debt. They're trying to use this movie to bring back some, legitimacy. And I understand that and make some money from it. But there's no way they would say this unless they weren't extremely confident about this movie. They wouldn't be screening this movie at CinemaCon so early on, pre-release, if they weren't confident about it. So it clearly is. The finished product clearly is a huge movie. So we got this year's movies. We've got a great plan for DC going forward from the outside looking in. And if you say that this is shit and you're not excited, you've got bias. Because as a DC fan, when you look at that slate, you should at least be excited, right? You don't know if it's going to be great. I don't know if it's going to be great. But the list of stuff they're doing is epic. Paradise Lost is a great story. Swamp Thing is a great DC character, right? Hasn't been utilised enough. We got Superman, we got Batman, we got a Lantern show. It's all very exciting. But if you're not interested in interconnected universes, then you've got the Batman sequel. That universe also has basically the sequel to the Batman early on HBO Max, which is Penguin. Continues, I think, a day or a week after the film finishes. Colin Farrell did a great job as that character. So that's exciting. Then you've got an Arkham show in development as well. Then you've got Joker 2, Joker Folie à Deux, Lady Gaga, Joaquin Phoenix, the continuation of Todd Phillips' Black Label universe. So there's so many exciting things. So if you don't like one thing, there should at least be one thing for everyone to be excited about in terms of DC and what they're doing going forward. So I'm excited for everything. But you don't have to be excited as a DC fan for everything. But I think you're a liar if you can't find one thing that's coming up with DC that's not exciting to you. Otherwise, you can be a Snyder fan, but you can also be a fan of DC in general. But if you're one of these like cultists, these, minority cultists that hate everything that DC do unless it's got the name Snyder on it, that's up to you. You can just like the Snyder DC stuff. It's not up to me to tell you what you can and can't do and what you can and can't say. That's not the point. The point being that you ain't poisoning this. And, the problem is with some of you, we're all excited for these movies this year. We're all excited about the Flash movie and the future of DC. But you always try and ruin our excitement. Let us be excited. You love Snyder's universe. I love Snyder's universe. That's cool. And you enjoy it. And you celebrate it. But don't ruin. Don't urinate on our excitement. Because that's not fair. Because that says something about you rather than us. Fandoms are very rarely unified, whether we're talking about football fandoms or entertainment fandoms, DC fandoms or Marvel fandoms. There's fans of Marvel Comics who hate the MCU, right? And there's MCU stans who are not big fans of the comics. There's a divide. There's a divide in DC. There's a divide everywhere. You can never really unite people because people can't be united. If people could be united, we wouldn't have any wars in the world today. People wouldn't have been divided over the COVID pandemic and the way it was handled, or the vaccine, or, transgender rights, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Human beings basically are tailor-made to disagree. But that's a good thing. And also, you can disagree constructively, politely, in the right way, as I do with you when you comment, when I'm live and we have conversations 9 times out of 10. Now, I've lost my temper with some of you before. That's true. I regret that, and I apologise when I've done that. But 9 times out of 10, I've tried to be very constructive with my answers. I love it. I love having fans of stuff, DC predominantly, talking about stuff, debating stuff. It's fun. I don't need people to agree with me. I don't look forward to having just to agree with people. I want us to talk about the issues we have with different things in DC. But the past is the past. And we can't keep on boring on about Justice League and Henry Cavill and about the Snyderverse situation, right? It's done. We can't change it. This is a new leadership. This is a new direction. They're trying to raise money. They're trying to fix the problems created by other people. And from what I can see, they're doing the right things for the DC brand. David Zaslav has spoken a lot about protecting the DC brand. And I think everything he's doing is protecting the DC brand. We can keep on talking about Snyder, and some of you can say, oh, he should be running DC now. But in terms of a business situation, Snyder wasn't the best thing for the central universe. So that's done. That's done. Fans are fighting a campaign to sell Snyderverse to Netflix. I agree with that campaign. I'd like to see that corner of the DC universe continue as well. Maybe it won't. Maybe it will. We'll have to wait and see, as I always say. I don't know. I'm not a precog. I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future. But what I can tell you is, from what I'm seeing from the plan from Gunn and Safran, it looks like a good, great, viable plan. Now, I was earlier talking about the possibility of the rest of the Gods and Monsters Chapter 1 DC Universe slate being announced at CinemaCon. So what's going to be on the rest of that slate? I've always believed that there's a Wonder Woman movie on there. I still believe that. And I believe there's a Green Lantern Corps movie on there. Now, James Gunn has been talking about a couple of surprise projects on there as well. Maybe he's talking about Green Lantern Corps, the movie, and Wonder Woman, the movie as well. And of course, the bigger question is, if there is a Wonder Woman movie in that slate, I think there has to be a Wonder Woman movie on that slate. They've already said Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman are going to be front and center. The Holy Trinity are going to be front and center. Zaslav made that clear from the very beginning. Wonder Woman is as important to Zaslav, Gunn, and Safran as Superman and Batman is. Don't think because she's a woman, they're underestimating or underselling her. They love her. I love her. Many people, millions and billions of people around the world, love Wonder Woman. She's a great character. The question remains, who's going to play her? And that's going to be a very, very interesting and important question going forward. And it could be, and CinemaCon isn't far away where we could find out the answers to these questions. I think Gal is a wonderful lady, a talented lady. I think she's not one of the best or greatest actors of all time, but she fits the bill as Wonder Woman. I would be sad to lose her, but again, just like Henry Cavill being removed, it's not a deal breaker. I feel bad for Henry. I loved his Superman. I would love to see him continue over on in the Snyderverse if we can do something about that. But ultimately, for me, it probably is the correct decision for this new franchise. I think that's clear, and Zaslav can see that as well. So even though I'd be sad that Gal's not going to be, Wonder Woman anymore, and if we do lose all the Snyder actors, and, obviously as well, there's the Ezra Miller situation, because if the Flash movie is so good, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well, how can they let all that go from that movie? That movie, if it's as good as they say it is, causes them a problem because they're making all these changes. Maybe, if they genuinely like the Flash movie so much, they're going to use a lot about the Flash movie going forward. So maybe they're going to do that already. But maybe it would be a good thing if all the Snyderverse actors were let go, because that will make even more sense if you do restore the Snyderverse in using them. It means they wouldn't be double booked all the time. That's always been a problem for me, and a bit of a messy situation. If they're part of the DCU, how can they be part of the Snyderverse? If they're part of the Snyderverse, how can they be part of the DCU? Unless it's still one in the same, and DCU is just a rebranded DCEU, something that we don't really know right now. So, yeah, and I'm very, very excited for CinemaCon now. Obviously, I won't be there. I know a couple of people who will be there, who will be making sure that I know what's going on. And in turn, from them telling me what's going on, I'll be able to let you know what's going on. This is what this channel's all about. Giving you the news, giving you the right, truthful information, but also having an opinion on it. This has been Friday's edition of the DC Universe Daily with me, Mick, your host with the most to your girlfriends and your wives. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection, and I'll see you again in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen!